Emperor Penguin. If penguins had a mascot for sheer stubborn endurance, it would be the Emperor. This is the largest of all penguin species, and it lives somewhere that barely qualifies as habitable, the sea ice fringing Antarctica, where winter temperatures regularly plunge below minus 40 degrees Celsius and winds can exceed 100 miles per hour. What really sets emperors apart isn't their size, though. It's their breeding strategy, which sounds almost absurd when you first hear it described. After the female lays a single egg, she hands it off to her mate and heads out across the ice toward open water, sometimes walking dozens of miles to reach food. The male is left holding the egg, literally balanced on his feet and tucked under a fold of warm skin called a brood pouch. He'll stand there through the darkest, coldest months of the Antarctic winter, eating nothing, huddling with hundreds of other males for warmth in a slow-rotating mass that biologists sometimes call a turtle formation, because the birds on the outside periodically cycle toward the center. By the time the female returns, often more than 2 months later, the male may have lost close to half his body weight. The chick usually hatches right around this time, and the female arrives with a stomach full of food to take over feeding duties, while the male, finally free, makes his own trek to the sea to eat for the first time in months. It's an extraordinary division of labor, built entirely around surviving conditions that would be lethal to almost any other bird.
King penguin. The king penguin is often mistaken for a smaller emperor, and it's easy to see why. The resemblance is obvious, right down to the coloring. But the two species actually live very different lives. King penguins breed on sub-Antarctic islands, like South Georgia and the Falklands, places with a genuinely milder climate than the Antarctic mainland. There's no dramatic months-long fast on sea ice here. Physically, kings are stunning. They carry bold orange-yellow patches that sweep down from behind the ears onto the chest, and their bodies are long and torpedo-shaped, built for serious underwater performance. They can dive several hundred meters below the surface, hunting for lanternfish and squid, staying down for stretches that would be impressive even for a much larger marine animal. Their breeding cycle is unusual too. It takes so long, over a year start to finish, that king penguins can't manage an annual breeding cycle the way most birds do. Instead, they typically raise 2 chicks every 3 years, staggering the timing so it doesn't line up neatly with the seasons. Visit a king penguin colony and you'll often see chicks in wildly different stages of development standing side by side, which is unusual in the bird world.
Adélie penguin. Adélie penguins are small, feisty, and probably the most classic-looking penguin in most people's mental image. Tuxedo coloring, quick movements, and a distinctive white ring circling each eye that gives them an alert, almost surprised expression. They breed directly on the Antarctic coastline, arriving in October as the brief southern summer begins, and their colonies can be chaotic, noisy places. Adélies build their nests out of small stones, which might sound like a minor detail, but it's actually a serious business among these birds. Good nesting sites need to sit slightly elevated so that when the ice melts, water doesn't flood the nest and chill the eggs. That makes stones a valuable, sometimes contested resource. Adélies aren't above sneaking a pebble or two from a neighbor's nest when the neighbor isn't watching, and squabbles over stolen stones are a regular part of colony life. Their main food source is krill, supplemented by small fish, and they're strong, efficient swimmers, covering long distances between the colony and open water to forage. Researchers have used Adélie populations as something of an environmental bellwether, since shifts in sea ice patterns tend to show up in their breeding success fairly quickly.
Chinstrap penguin. The name says it all. A thin black line runs beneath the chinstrap penguin's head, looking uncannily like the strap of a helmet. It's one of those features that makes the species instantly recognizable, even to people who don't know much else about penguins. Chinstraps breed on islands scattered around the Antarctic Peninsula and the Southern Ocean, and they do it in staggering numbers. Some colonies contain hundreds of thousands of breeding pairs, packed onto rocky slopes, filling the air with near constant noise and the unmistakable smell of a large seabird colony. Anyone who has visited one in person tends to describe the sensory experience as overwhelming. The sound alone can be deafening. Temperament-wise, chinstraps have a reputation for being among the more combative penguin species, particularly when defending a nest site or a chick. They'll challenge intruders, including much larger animals, without much hesitation. This aggression likely serves them well given how densely packed their colonies are. With neighbors only inches away, a willingness to stand your ground probably matters a great deal.
Gentoo penguin. Gentoo penguins are easy to spot thanks to 2 features: a bright orange-red bill and a broad white stripe that arcs across the top of the head like a headband. They're also, somewhat surprisingly, the fastest swimming penguin species on record, capable of hitting speeds above 35 kilometers per hour underwater, faster than any other penguin, and quicker than most people would guess a flightless bird could manage. Unlike some of the more ice-dependent species, gentoos tend to breed on sub-Antarctic islands and parts of the
Antarctic peninsula, where conditions are somewhat less extreme. They're methodical nest builders, arranging pebbles into tidy, well-organized mounds, and pairs will often return to and refurbish the same nest site year after year, sometimes maintaining lifelong pair bonds. Their diet is fairly varied compared to some other penguins. Fish, squid, and crustaceans all make the menu, depending on what's locally abundant. That flexibility may partly explain why Gentoo populations have expanded their range southward in recent decades, colonizing areas that were once considered too cold, a shift some researchers link to changing regional temperatures.
Macaroni penguin. With its wild yellow-orange crest feathers sweeping back from above each eye, the macaroni penguin looks like it's permanently mid-tantrum, or possibly just having a spectacular hair day. The name itself has a fun bit of history. It references 18th century macaroni fashion, a flamboyant English style built around exaggerated, flashy hairstyles, which early naturalists apparently thought this crested bird resembled. Macaronis are, by sheer numbers, one of the most abundant penguin species on the planet, breeding in enormous colonies across sub-Antarctic islands. Yet abundance hasn't made them immune to trouble. Several populations have shown concerning declines in recent decades, and researchers point to shifting ocean temperatures and changing prey availability as likely culprits. Krill, a dietary staple for macaronis, is itself sensitive to ocean conditions, so disruptions ripple upward through the food chain. Despite the pressures some colonies face, macaronis remain a familiar sight across the Southern Ocean's remote islands, and their crests make them one of the easiest crested penguins to identify at a glance, at least once you know what you're looking for.
Royal penguin. The royal penguin is often described as the macaroni's close cousin, and biologically speaking, that's not far off. The two are closely related and share the same striking yellow crest. The clearest way to tell them apart is the face. Royal penguins have pale white or light gray facial feathers, while macaronis typically show dark feathering in the same area. What makes the royal penguin especially notable is how restricted its range is. It breeds almost nowhere except Macquarie Island, a remote, windswept speck of land in the Southern Ocean, roughly halfway between New Zealand and Antarctica. That kind of geographic concentration is unusual among penguins and makes the species more vulnerable in principle to anything that might disrupt conditions on that single island. Their diet mirrors that of their crested relatives, mostly krill along with small fish and other marine invertebrates, and their breeding colonies on Macquarie Island can be enormous, given how few other places on Earth the species calls home. Rockhopper penguin. True to their name, rockhopper penguins don't waddle so much as bounce. Rather than sliding on their bellies or waddling upright the way many penguins do on ice, rockhoppers navigate the jagged, rocky coastlines of their island homes by hopping both feet together again and again, sometimes scaling steep, slippery cliffs that look nearly impossible to climb. They're among the smallest of the crested penguins, but what they lack in size, they make up for in attitude and appearance. Spiky yellow eyebrow feathers stick out at odd angles, paired with striking red eyes, giving rockhoppers one of the more distinctive looks in the penguin world, somewhere between punk rocker and disgruntled commuter, depending on who you ask. There are actually a few recognized subspecies of rockhopper spread across different island groups in the Southern Oceans, including the Falklands, Tristan da Cunha, and various sub-Antarctic islands. Their climbing ability isn't just a party trick either. It lets them access nesting sites that would be entirely out of reach for less agile penguins, tucked into rocky crevices well above the waterline.
Fiordland penguin. The Fiordland penguin stands out from most of its relatives in one big way. It avoids open beaches in favor of dense, temperate coastal forest, nesting under thick vegetation and among tree roots along the rugged southwestern coastline of New Zealand's South Island. It's a genuinely shy, secretive bird, and its forest habitat, combined with generally low population numbers, makes it one of the harder penguin species to observe in the wild. Physically, it's identifiable by thick, bushy yellow eyebrow stripes running back from the bill, giving it a look distinct from the more slender crests of species like the rockhopper or macaroni. Unfortunately, the Fiordland penguin story in recent decades has been one of gradual decline. Human disturbance near nesting areas, along with introduced predators such as stoats, dogs, and cats, none of which existed in New Zealand before human settlement, have taken a toll on breeding success. Conservation groups have worked on predator control and habitat protection in an effort to stabilize the population, though the species remains a conservation concern.
Snares penguin. Named for the Snares Islands, a small and remote New Zealand island group south of the mainland, this penguin has benefited enormously from something most wildlife can't count on: near total isolation from humans. The Snares Snares Islands have never been permanently settled, and access is tightly restricted, which has spared the Snares penguin from many of the direct human pressures, habitat destruction, introduced predators, tourism disturbance that have hit other penguin species hard. Visually, the Snares penguin carries bold yellow crest feathers and a heavy, deep orange bill, giving it a fairly striking appearance despite its relatively small range. Its diet leans on krill, small fish, and squid, sourced from the nutrient-rich water surrounding its home islands. Because so few people have ever set foot near an active Snares penguin colony, much of what's known about the species comes from a comparatively small number of dedicated research expeditions, which has made long-term population monitoring a slower, more painstaking process than for penguins living in more accessible locations.
Erect-crested penguin. This species earns its name honestly. Its yellow crest feathers don't sweep backward the way a Macaronis or Rockhoppers do. Instead, they stand up almost straight, projecting outward and upward from above each eye, in a way that looks almost startled, or perhaps permanently alert. Erect-crested penguins breed primarily on New Zealand's Bounty and Antipodes Islands, two remote sub-Antarctic locations that are difficult to reach and rarely visited. That remoteness has a downside though. Scientists simply don't have as much data on this species compared to better studied penguins. Basic questions about population trends, at-sea behavior, and long-term threats remain harder to answer with confidence, partly because sustained field research is so logistically demanding in such an isolated location. What is known suggests the species may be facing population declines, though pinning down exact causes has proven tricky given the gaps in available data. It's a reminder that even in a group of animals as well-loved and widely documented as penguins, some species still exist largely at the edges of scientific knowledge.
Little penguin. At roughly 30 to 35 centimeters tall, the little penguin lives up to its name. It's the smallest penguin species on Earth by a comfortable margin. Native to the coastlines of southern Australia and New Zealand, it's also commonly called the little blue penguin, or simply the blue penguin, thanks to its slate blue plumage. Quite different from the classic black and white look most people associate with penguins. Its behavior sets it apart just as much as its size and coloring. Little penguins spend their days out at sea, foraging for small fish and squid, then return to shore each evening in a behavior known as the penguin parade, a term that's become genuinely famous in places like Phillip Island, Victoria, where crowds gather at dusk specifically to watch the birds come ashore in small groups, moving cautiously up the beach toward their burrows. That evening return isn't just charming to watch, it's a survival strategy. Coming ashore in numbers under cover of near darkness offers some protection against predators that might pick off a lone penguin more easily. Little penguins nest in burrows or natural crevices along the coast, often close to human settlements, which has made them one of the more visible and closely studied penguin species despite their tiny size.